The war had consumed the galaxy for 300 years longer than some species had possessed spaceflight. Longer than entire civilizations had existed. Ambassador Shialara stood before the Alliance Council chambers, her silver skin reflecting the pale light from a dozen suns visible through the observation dome. And she felt the weight of those centuries pressing down every word she was about to speak. The Kresh had come from the dark zones beyond the outer rim with a hunger that could not be reasoned with and a hive mind that could not be divided. They had swept through system after system, their insectoid forms moving in perfect synchronization, their ships flowing like water through space, their tactics precise and calculated and utterly without mercy, though they never broke the ancient rules of warfare. That was the problem, Shialara thought bitterly. Everyone followed the rules. Battles were scheduled weeks in advance. Both sides agreed on neutral zones where no weapons could be fired. Prisoner exchanges happened on predetermined dates. Certain weapons were banned by ancient convention: chemical agents, biological warfare, kinetic bombardment of civilian centers, artificial intelligence warfare, and a dozen other methods deemed too barbaric for civilized species. The Valshara had proposed the conventions 10,000 years ago when the first galactic wars threatened to consume everything. Every species that joined the galactic community signed the accords, promised to fight with honor, swore to preserve some dignity even in destruction. For 10,000 years it had worked, mostly, but the Kresh were winning. Slowly, inexorably, they pushed forward. Their hive structure meant they never argued about strategy, never second-guessed orders, never broke formation due to individual fear or ambition. They were efficient in a way no coalition of independent minds could match. The Free Worlds Alliance was exhausted. The Thorian shipyards could barely keep pace with losses. The Zekthi warrior clans had lost half their breeding males. The Velshara diplomatic corps had negotiated 17 ceasefires, and all 17 had merely delayed the inevitable. "We need new allies," Shialara said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. The council members shifted in their seats. A Thorian general with crystal-based biology that refracted light into rainbow patterns. A Zekhi clan mother whose forearms were decorated with battle scars. A Velshara elder whose silver skin had darkened with age. And representatives from a dozen other species. "There are no new allies," the Thorian general said, his voice rumbling like tectonic plates grinding together. "Every spacefaring species has already chosen a side or declared neutrality. Not every species." Shialara replied. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew what she meant. "No," the Zekthi clan mother said flatly. "The humans are quarantined for good reason." 50 years ago, a Velshara exploration vessel had made first contact with the species that called itself humanity. The encounter had been a disaster, not violent, but chaotic and confusing. Humans had no unified government, no single voice. Dozens of competing nations and factions all claiming to speak for their species, when the Velshara had tried to explain galactic law, tried to invite them to join the community of civilized worlds. The humans had listened politely and then withdrawn. They had sealed their system, refusing all contact, saying they needed time to get their house in order. The galaxy had been relieved. Humans seemed volatile, unpredictable, too fractured to be trusted with advanced technology or interstellar politics. But Shialara had read the reports carefully. She had studied the brief glimpses of human history that the exploration team had gathered. She had seen something that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. Humans fought differently. Their history was an endless parade of conflicts, each one breaking rules that previous wars had established. They adapted constantly, learned from every defeat, turned weaknesses into advantages. They had fought wars of extermination, and wars of ideology, and wars over resources, and wars over abstract concepts. They had used every method imaginable, and several that seemed impossible, and they had survived. The Kresh will reach the inner systems within 20 years, Shilara said quietly. Perhaps sooner if they commit their reserve fleets. Our projections show a 73% chance of total alliance collapse within a generation. So you would bring in a species we know nothing about? The elder Velshara asked. A species too chaotic to govern themselves. What makes you think they could help even if they agreed? Because they have fought more wars in their brief history than we have in 10,000 years, Shilara said. Because they have no concept of honorable warfare, only victory or death. Because when I read their transmissions and their entertainment broadcasts and their historical records, I saw a species that terrifies itself with its own capacity for violence. She paused, letting her words sink in. The question is not whether humans can help, she continued. The question is whether we are desperate enough to ask, and whether we can accept what they might become if we unleash them on the galaxy. The council debated for 6 hours. Votes were cast and retracted, and cast again. Finally, by the narrowest margin possible, they authorized Shilara to make the journey to Sol System. She went alone, in an unarmed diplomatic vessel, broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency Earth's. Response came within minutes of her arrival. Simple coordinates directing her to orbit around their homeworld. And a terse message: send one representative to the surface. Come unarmed. We will listen but make no promises. Shilara descended through the atmosphere of a world so vibrant it hurt to look at blues and greens and whites swirling together, teeming with life. She landed in a place called Geneva, in a building that had once housed human attempts at global governance. The human delegation consisted of 7 people representing different nations. They were short compared to most species. Shilara, new, bipedal, with expressive faces and eyes that revealed too much emotion. She explained the war, 300 years of stalemate, the crash advance, the alliance's desperation, and you want our help. One of the humans said, a woman with dark skin and sharp eyes who introduced herself as Secretary Chen. Yes, Shilara said simply. Why should we care what happens to species we've never met? Another human asked. Because the crash will not stop, Shilara replied. If they defeat the alliance, they will turn their attention outward toward isolated systems. Like yours, you cannot hide forever. The humans exchanged glances. Something passed between them that Shilara could not read. Your people fight with rules, Secretary Chen said. Honor and conventions and scheduled battles. We read about it in your transmissions. Is that accurate? Yes, Shilara admitted. War without civilization is just mutual extinction. Maybe, Secretary Chen said. Or maybe civilization without victory is just slow extinction. Give us 48 hours to discuss this. Shilara returned to orbit and waited. She expected refusal or demands for territory or requests for technology. What she received instead was a simple message. Help is coming, stay clear of Sol System for the next 6 weeks. What arrives will not be a military fleet. It will be volunteers, contractors, people who choose to fight. Tell your commanders not to judge us by your standards. 6 weeks later, the human fleet emerged from FDL at the borderline sector, and nothing in Shilara's experience had prepared her for what she saw. The ships were mismatched, clearly built by different factions. Some were sleek and modern, others looked ancient and patched together. They broadcast no unified command structure, followed no formation protocols, and their weapons, by the ancestors. The Thorian general whispered when he saw the scanner reports. They brought fission bombs, kinetic accelerators, chemical propellants. This is museum technology. This is what we use. Came a voice over the communication channel, speaking accented but understandable Galactic Common. I'm Commander Sarah Chun, Human Volunteer Fleet, and we're here to win your war. The Thorian general's form flickered with colors that indicated confusion and concern. You understand we have scheduled engagements? Rules of warfare? Protocols that must be. Chun's laugh cut him off. General, we didn't come here to play by rules. We came here to save lives. Now where's the enemy? The Battle of Borderline Sector was scheduled for 3 weeks from the day the humans arrived. Both sides had agreed to the date months earlier, as was customary, and the crash had already begun. Positioning their fleets according to Standard Doctrine Commander. Sarah Chun listened to the briefing from the Thorian general with increasing disbelief. Let me understand this, she said, leaning forward in her command chair. You told them when and where you would fight, and they agreed? And now both sides are just waiting? It is how warfare has been conducted for millennia, the general replied, his crystalline form pulsing with what Shialara had learned to recognize as patience. It allows both sides to evacuate civilians, prepare medical facilities, and engage in combat with minimal collateral damage. Chun turned to her executive officer, Marcus Webb, a scarred veteran with gray hair and calculating eyes. He shook his head slowly, and she could see he was thinking the same thing she was. General, with respect. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Chun said. The command channel erupted with protests from Alliance officers. Shialara, observing from the human flagship, felt her skin flush with embarrassment, even as part of her agreed, Commander Chun. The Zeek-Thi clan mother growled, her forearms gesturing aggressively. You will respect established conventions, or you will leave. We did not ask for barbarians. No, you asked for help, Chun shot back. And you're getting it, Webb. What's our weapons status? All ships report ready, Webb replied. Railguns loaded, missiles armed, conventional and nuclear warheads prepped, though command. I should note that half the Alliance fleet just went to high alert when I mentioned nukes. Chun smiled without humor. Yeah. I noticed. General question. Are there crash ships in this sector right now? Of course, the Thorian said. They are positioning for the scheduled engagement. Just as we are. There is a neutral corridor between our forces that must not be violated. Right, Chun said. That corridor, is it marked with mines or sensors or anything physical? No. It exists by mutual agreement and honor. Perfect, Chun interrupted. All human ships. This is Commander Chun. We're going hunting. Target the crash supply lines in grid. 7-7 Alpha, ignore the neutral corridor concept. Weapons free in 30 seconds. Commander, you cannot. The general's voice rose to a thundering pitch. This violates but the human fleet was already moving. They didn't flow like the crash or move in precise formations like the Alliance. They scattered like a pack of predators, each ship choosing its own vector, accelerating at rates that would have injured most species, but which humans tolerated with chemical assistance and sheer bloody-mindedness. Crash supply convoy in grid. 7-7 Alpha never saw them coming. The engagement wasn't scheduled, wasn't predicted, wasn't possible according to 300 years of preceding railgun rounds. Traveling at a fraction of light speed tore through. Crash vessels designed to withstand energy weapons, but not kinetic impacts. Nuclear missiles detonated in patterns that created overlapping kill zones. And one human ship, a converted mining vessel called the Righteous Fury, rammed a crash carrier at full acceleration, while its crew evacuated. In escape pods, the entire battle lasted 7 minutes when the human fleet returned to Alliance lines. They had destroyed 37 crash ships and crippled a dozen more. They had suffered losses, 4 human vessels destroyed, another 8 damaged, but they had achieved something the Alliance hadn't managed in decades. They had surprised the crash. What have you done? The Thorian general demanded, his form flickering through colors that Shialara recognized as rage and horror. The crash will respond with what? Chun asked. More scheduled battles? Look, General, I get it. You've been fighting this war so long you forgot what war actually is. It's not a game with rules. It's not a chess match where both players take turns. It's survival. And my species got very good at survival. The communication channels exploded with arguments. Crash commanders demanded sanctions against Earth for war crimes. Alliance officers were split between outrage at human methods and quiet acknowledgement of human results. The council convened an emergency session. Shalara found herself defending the humans. Even as part of her recoiled from what she had witnessed. They broke every convention. A Velshara elder said. They also broke the stalemate. Shialara countered. In 7 minutes, they accomplished what we couldn't in 7 years. Over the next weeks, the human fleet continued its campaign. They didn't wait for scheduled engagements, didn't honor neutral zones, didn't telegraph their intentions. They laid mines in corridors the Kresh considered safe. They used sound and light and electromagnetic pulses to confuse Kresh communications. They broadcast music, actual human music. Chaotic and unpredictable on frequencies the Kresh used for hive coordination. Disrupting their perfect synchronization. Marcus Webb led a raid that destroyed a Kresh listening post by disguising his ships as destroyed hulks drifting on ballistic trajectories. The Kresh never considered that anyone would waste resources on such a slow, patient approach. Chen herself commanded an assault that used the corona of a star for cover. Attacking from a direction the Kresh assumed was impossible because no sane species would risk radiation exposure. They're not sane. A Kresh commander reportedly transmitted before his ship was destroyed. They're humans. The word spread through both fleets like a virus. Humans, they didn't follow the rules. They didn't value honor over victory. They adapted faster than any species had a right to adapt. Learning from every engagement and implementing new tactics within hours. A young Zekthi warrior named Krathax volunteered to serve on a human vessel. His clan mother had forbidden it, called it shameful, but he wanted to understand. What he found shocked him. Human crews argued constantly. Officers questioned orders. Different ships disagreed on tactics and implemented their own solutions. It was chaos. But it was effective chaos because it meant the Kresh could never predict what humans would do. You don't think as one. Krathax observed the Webb during a mission briefing. Hell no, Webb replied. That's our advantage. The Kresh hive mind is efficient, but it's predictable. Give them a problem they've seen before and they'll solve it instantly. Give them something new and they need time to process. Communicate, adapt as a collective, but us. We've got 200 individual minds on this ship alone, all thinking different thoughts, and when we meet a new idea, someone usually has one. Krathax began learning human tactics. He watched how they used initiative over obedience, creativity over protocol, speed over perfection. The Kresh were adapting too, though. Their hive mind was slower to change, but when it changed completely. They began anticipating human unpredictability, setting traps for raiders, reinforcing supply lines. Chun stood on her bridge reviewing casualty reports. Human losses were mounting, and the novelty of their tactics was wearing off. They're learning, Webb said quietly. Yeah, Chun agreed. Which means we need to escalate. She opened a channel to Earth, using quantum communication that couldn't be intercepted. This is Commander Chun. Request immediate deployment of Phase 2 Assets Authorization Code, Prometheus Protocol. The response came from Secretary Chun herself. Confirmed. Phase 2 launches in 72 hours and Commander, make sure our allies are sitting down when it arrives. 3 days later, Shialara was summoned to the human flagship. Chen looked tired, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been excitement or might have been fear. Ambassador, I need you to tell your council something. What they've seen so far. The raids, the unconventional tactics, the rule-breaking. That was us being restrained. Restrained? Shialara's voice came out as a whisper. We were testing the waters, learning the battlefield. Chung continued. But Earth has reviewed our reports, and they've made a decision. We're not here to help. You win battles. We're here to end this war. And that means we need to show the Kresh something they've never seen before. Something that will make them understand they cannot win. What are you planning? Shialara asked. Chung pulled up a tactical display. It showed trajectories, vectors, timing calculations that made no sense until Shialara suddenly understood what she was looking at. By the ancestors. She breathed. You can't, it's called a show of force, Chum said. We broadcasted to the galaxy 3 days ago. Gave the Kresh time to evacuate. We're not monsters. Ambassador, but we need them to understand what we're capable of. The broadcast had been simple. Human ships would attack a Kresh staging area in the Epsilon sector. They gave the date and time 24 hours from now. They even gave the method, and then they dared the Kresh to stop them. Every fleet in the sector was watching when the human ships arrived. They came in fast, broadcasting on all channels, making no attempt at stealth. The Kresh had fortified the position. They had tripled the usual defenses, had positioned their best vessels, had prepared every countermeasure their hive mind could devise. The humans ignored all of it. They flew straight through the defensive perimeter, taking losses but never slowing. They deployed weapons the Alliance had never seen, shaped nuclear charges that focused the blast. Kinetic kill vehicles that couldn't be stopped once launched. And something the humans called rods from God. Simple tungsten rods accelerated to relativistic speeds. Phase 3 began without fanfare or formal declaration. The human fleet simply stopped operating as a unified force and became something the galaxy had never witnessed: a swarm of independent predators. Each ship captain received broad strategic objectives, but no specific tactical orders. A destroyer captain named Rodriguez decided to raid Kresh mining operations using hit-and-run attacks. A frigate commander called Okonkwo specialized in jamming Kresh communications, turning their perfect coordination into chaos. A carrier group under Captain Zhao launched fighter wings that operated like wolf packs, adapting their strategies mid-battle based on what worked. The Kresh hive mind had evolved to predict patterns, to analyze enemy behavior and develop counters. But humans had no patterns, or rather, they had 200 different patterns, all operating simultaneously, all learning independently. Acts watched it unfold from the bridge of Webb's ship, the Indomitable, and slowly began to understand why his people were losing. You don't coordinate, he said to Webb during a tactical review. Sure we do, Webb replied. Just not the way you're thinking. Watch this. He pulled up a communication log showing dozens of human ships sharing information in real time. Rodriguez found a weak point in Kresh sensor grids, one message said. Within hours, 15 other captains had adapted their tactics to exploit the same weakness. But each in their own ways. Some used it for ambushes, others for intelligence gathering, still others as bait for traps. We steal good ideas constantly, Webb explained, but we implement them differently. The Kresh see 15 ships using the same intelligence and assume it's coordinated. But really, it's 15 different captains all thinking, hey, that's clever. I can use that. So when they develop a counter for Rodriguez's tactics, it doesn't work against Okonkwo's variation or Zhao's adaptation. It's inefficient, Krathak said. It's redundant, Webb corrected. Inefficiency implies waste. This is insurance. If one approach fails, 14 others are still working. The Kresh began to fracture under the pressure. For the first time in their recorded history, different hive clusters started developing divergent responses to threats. Some doubled down on their traditional coordination. Others tried to mimic human unpredictability. Badly Alliance officers watched with a mixture of awe and horror as humans recruited volunteers from liberated worlds. They didn't just accept the volunteers, they taught them. Krathex became the first non-human to complete human tactical training. Webb had given him command of a small raiding team, 2 human ships and 3 Ziegfeld vessels crewed by warriors who wanted to learn. Your people value honor above victory. Webb had told him. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete. Real honor is protecting those who depend on you. And sometimes that means doing things that don't feel honorable. Krathak's first independent mission was a disaster by Ziegfeld standards. He ambushed a Kresh supply convoy using a feint and a flanking maneuver that his clan mother would have called cowardly. But he saved all his ships and destroyed the convoy. And when he returned to base, his human crew members clapped him on the back and called him a natural. He hated how good it felt to hear Lara documented everything. She had become an embedded journalist of sorts, recording the transformation of galactic warfare for posterity or as a warning. She wasn't sure which. She interviewed Chen regularly, trying to understand the human perspective. Do you ever question your methods? Lara asked during one such interview. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Every day Marcus and I talk about it constantly. We're teachers back home. Did you know that? I taught military history. He taught ethics. And now we're out here making history that future students will judge. And why do it this way? Because the alternative is losing, Chen said simply. The Kresh aren't going to suddenly develop compassion. They're a hive species that sees other life as resources or threats. And your alliance, for all its nobility, was losing slowly. We're not noble, Ambassador, but we're effective. And sometimes effectiveness is what survival requires. The Thorian strategists had begun studying human tactics obsessively. They had set up an entire research division dedicated to understanding human warfare, and their findings were disturbing. They don't just adapt faster, the head researcher explained to Lara. They seem to instinctively understand something we had to learn through bitter experience. That war is not a separate sphere of existence with its own rules, but an extension of survival instincts when they fight. They're not performing a ritual or following doctrine. They're problem-solving in real time. Is that not what all species do? No, the researcher said flatly. Most species, once spacefaring, develop formalized warfare because the stakes are so high, lose a world, and you've lost billions of lives. So you create rules to limit damage. But humans? They evolved on a death world where survival meant constant adaptation. Their entire approach to conflict reflects that they don't ask, what are the rules? They ask, what works? The crash escalated in response. They deployed weapons that had been held in reserve for centuries, planet crackers, weapons designed to shatter worlds. A line even the Kresh had been reluctant to cross. The target was Velshara Prime, Shellara's homeworld. The Kresh broadcast their intention 48 hours in advance, as was customary, giving civilians time to evacuate. The Alliance began the evacuation protocols, but transporting billions of beings in 48 hours was impossible. At best, they could save 30% of the population. Chun reviewed the intelligence and immediately diverted every available human ship to Velshara Prime. Not to evacuate, to defend. You can't stop a planet cracker, the Thorian general said. The weapon is designed to be unstoppable. It uses gravitational manipulation to... I know what it does, Chan interrupted. And you're right. We can't stop it, but we can make sure they regret using it. The human fleet positioned itself between the incoming Kresh Armada and Velshara Prime. They were outnumbered 5-1, but they had learned something about Kresh psychology. The hive mind was logical, calculating, and it valued resources. They're bringing their planet cracker, Webb said, studying the tactical display. That means this fleet represents a massive investment of resources and their most advanced weapon. They'll want to protect it, so we threaten it, Chun agreed. All ships, target their flagship, ignore everything else. I want every weapon we have pointed at the ship carrying the planet cracker. They either withdraw the weapon or risk losing it, the Kresh calculated, as humans knew they would. Losing the weapon was unacceptable, but so was backing down. They tried to fight their way through. The Battle of Velshara Prime lasted 16 hours. Human ships died one after another, but each one took crash vessels with them, and more importantly, each one delayed the crash. Advance Rodriguez's destroyer rammed the crash cruiser at full speed after his weapons were depleted. Okonkwo's frigate used itself as a shield to protect evacuation transports. Jiao's carrier deployed all its fighters, then used its empty launch bays to store civilian evacuees. Shen's flagship took a direct hit that crippled its engines. Webb wanted to evacuate the crew, but Chun refused. "We can still fire weapons. That means we can still fight." With 2 hours remaining before the planet cracker could be deployed, the crash made their move. They would sacrifice their escort fleet to get the weapon in position, and then the human reinforcements arrived. Not military ships, civilian vessels. Cargo haulers, colony transports, mining ships, hundreds of them, jumping in from Sol System with a simple message. "Earth heard you needed help evacuating. We brought every ship that could fly." But they didn't head for the planet, they headed straight for the crash fleet. "What are you doing?" Shialara broadcast from the planet's surface, where she had stayed to help coordinate evacuations. "You're civilian ships. You're not armed. You'll be, we know what we are," came a response from a cargo hauler captain. "And we know what they are, but there's a planet full of people behind us. And we didn't come all this way to watch them die." All civilian ships. Ram speed for Earth, for the Alliance. For everyone who's counting on us. The crash hive mind had no category for this. Civilian vessels attacking a military fleet made no logical sense. It had to be a trick, a diversion. The first cargo hauler hit the crash flagship at full acceleration. Its hull was reinforced for carrying heavy loads, and its impact split the crash ship in two. The planet cracker weapon, delicate and complex despite its power, was damaged beyond repair. More civilian ships followed. They died by the dozens, but they bought time for Alliance forces to arrive. Time for the remaining human military ships to regroup. Time for Velshara Prime's orbital defenses to come online. The crash retreated, their planet cracker destroyed, their fleet decimated. Their hive mind stunned by the realization that humans would sacrifice anything to protect their allies in the aftermath. Shialara stood in what remained of Chun's bridge. The commander was injured but alive, and she was coordinating rescue operations for survivors from both sides. "You saved my world," Shialara said quietly. "We saved our friends," Chun corrected. "That's what humans do. We're a tribal species. Ambassador, once we decide you're part of our tribe, we'll burn down the universe to keep you safe, even at such cost." The revelation came during a routine intelligence briefing 6 weeks after the Battle of Velshara Prime. A Thorian analyst had been reviewing the timeline of human operations and noticed something impossible, Commander Chun. The analyst said, his crystalline form flickering with confusion. "These trajectories don't make sense." Chun and Webb joined him at the tactical display. Shialara, never far from the human commanders these days, followed. "What am I looking at?" Chun asked. "These are slower than light missiles launched from Sol System," the analyst explained. "We've detected 17 of them on various trajectories throughout the galaxy, but according to our calculations, they were launched before you ever received our request for help. Some were launched months before Ambassador Shialara even arrived at Earth." The room fell silent. "Clarify," the Thorian general demanded. "Are you saying humans prepared for war against the crash before they knew the crash existed?" Webb and Chun exchanged glances. Something passed between them, and Shialara saw Chun's shoulders sag slightly, as if releasing a weight she had carried for months. "Not against the crash specifically," Chun said quietly. "Against whoever we needed to fight Earth. Spent 50 years in isolation, General. And we didn't waste that time. We studied every transmission we could intercept, learned about galactic politics, Mapped the major powers, and we prepared for the worst-case scenario. Which what? Shialara asked, though part of her already knew the answer, that we would need to fight a war we couldn't afford to lose, Webb said. So we built weapons, not the ships you've seen. Those are relatively conventional, but contingencies, last resort options. Things we hoped we'd never need to use. These missiles, the analyst said, pointing at the display. What are they? Chen was quiet for a long moment. They're called RKV's relativistic kill vehicles. Simple concept. Really, just large masses accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed when they hit something. The kinetic energy releases, she paused, searching for words. Catastrophic. Where are they targeted? The general asked. Webb pulled up a more detailed display. 17 red trajectory lines stretched across the galactic map, each terminating at a different location, and Shialara felt her blood chill as she recognized the targets: breeding worlds, resource centers, shipyards, and hive nexuses, the 17 most critical targets in the Dominion. You plan to destroy their entire civilization, the general said, his voice barely above a whisper. We plan to end the war, Chun corrected. These were launched as insurance. If the Kresh couldn't be defeated conventionally, if they pushed toward Earth or toward our allies, then we needed options. When do they arrive? Shialara asked. Variable, Webb said. The first will reach its target in 4 months, the last in 3 years. They're on ballistic trajectories now. Can't be recalled, can't be stopped by conventional means. And you didn't think to mention this? The general's form flared with colors indicating rage. We're mentioning it now, Chun said. Because intelligence suggests the Kresh are planning a major offensive. They're consolidating their fleets, pulling resources from frontier sectors. They're going to make one massive push to break the alliance, probably within the next 2 months. So you're threatening them with total annihilation? We're giving them a choice, Webb said. Surrender and live, or push forward and face extinction. The RKVs don't care about honor or conventions or scheduled battles. They just end things. The Alliance Council convened an emergency session. The debate raged for days. Had the humans overstepped? Were they monsters in disguise? Could the galaxy trust a species that planned genocide as a contingency? Shialara found herself defending humans again. Though her own feelings were conflicted, they did what they believed necessary to survive. Is that not what any species would do when faced with extinction? But they weren't facing extinction when they launched those weapons, a Velshara elder argued. They launched them before they even joined the war. They launched them when they decided they might need to join the war, Shialara countered. The Kresh were always going to turn toward. So eventually, the humans just decided to prepare for that inevitability. We called them paranoid. But perhaps they were simply realistic, while the Alliance debated. The Kresh made their move. The assault came without warning or scheduled engagement. 300 years of convention abandoned in a desperate gamble. The Kresh threw every available ship at the Alliance core worlds. A massive simultaneous strike designed to decapitate the Alliance leadership. Chen had expected this. They know about the RKVs now, our intelligence leaks. There's leaks. Everyone's leaks, so they're making a desperate play to end the war before the first RKV arrives. Force a surrender. Then maybe they can negotiate. Can we stop them? The general asked. Not conventionally, Webb admitted. They're hitting 16 worlds simultaneously. We can maybe defend 6, maybe. Then what do we do? Chum pulled up a communication template she had prepared weeks earlier. We call their bluff, and we make them understand that we're not bluffing. The message went out on every frequency, in every language, broadcast to both fleets and civilian populations. To the Kresh Dominion, you have launched an attack on Alliance core worlds. This is your final warning. You have 48 hours to withdraw all forces and surrender unconditionally. Failure To comply will result in the immediate deployment of Phase 4 assets. We have 17 RKVs currently in transit to your breeding worlds, but we also have 6 that were held in reserve, which we can redirect to arrive within days' withdrawal. Or watch your entire species burn. You're threatening civilians, the Velshar elder said. Horrified, we're threatening everyone, Chun agreed. Because that's what total war means. Not soldiers fighting soldiers in neat little boxes, but entire civilizations risking everything. The Kresh need to understand that they can't win. That continuing this war means mutual extinction. Maybe that finally motivates them to talk. The Kresh response came within hours, not from their military commanders, but from something new, something that shocked every xenobiologist in the Alliance individual. Hive clusters were breaking away from the central coordination. Not all of them, but dozens, then hundreds. The hive mind was fracturing under pressure, developing what could only be called dissent. Some clusters advocated for continued war. Others demanded negotiation. Still others proposed abandoning the Dominion entirely and fleeing to unmapped space. It was unprecedented. The Kresh had been unified for their entire recorded history, but faced with existential threat, their perfect coordination was shattering. What did you do? Shia asked Chen. We introduced them to fear, Chen replied. Real fear, existential fear, the kind that makes you question everything. The Kresh hive mind is efficient, but it's never had to deal with internal disagreement. Because it never faced a threat that could actually end them, now it does. And the structure is collapsing. While the Kresh civil discord grew, Marcus Webb was planning something that Chen had authorized with great reluctance. We need to capture a queen, Webb said during a strategy session with his most trusted officers. The Thorian general's form went perfectly still. That's impossible. The queens are protected by layers of security that assume the attacker follows conventional military doctrine, Webb interrupted. But we're not going to attack conventionally. We're going to use stealth, speed, and tactics that the Kresh won't expect because they're considered. He paused. Wow, heretical by most species. What tactics? The general asked. Webb pulled up a mission plan that made Shilara's skin flush with horror. Infiltration using captured Kresh vessels. Biological agents to sedate the Queen's guards without killing them. Extraction via unshielded atmospheric entry to avoid detection. Every step violated some convention or ethical guideline. This is what you judge us for, Webb said quietly. Not for being effective, but for being willing to do what needs doing. We can sit here and debate honor while the war continues. Or we can act and maybe end this. Krathax volunteered for the mission immediately. When his clan mother protested, he said simply, I have learned that honor means protecting the innocent. If capturing one queen saves millions of lives across the galaxy, then that is where honor lies. The mission launched with a team of 20 humans. 5 Zikthi including Krathax, 3 Velshara who had trained with human special forces, and 2 thorium volunteers whose crystalline biology made them ideal for technical operations. They infiltrated the Kresh Queen's hive using a captured transport, posing as wounded soldiers returning from battle. The Kresh security forces never questioned it. Why would they? No one had ever attempted such a thing. Webb's team moved through the hive complex like ghosts. They used what humans called social engineering, exploiting assumptions and protocols. The Kresh followed instinctively. Wounded soldiers need medical attention, so no one stopped them as they moved deeper. Supply transports are always coming and going, so their presence in restricted areas raised no alarms when they reached the Queen's chamber. They found her attended by hundreds of warriors. But Webb had prepared for this chemical dispersal agents designed specifically for Kresh biology, non-lethal but highly effective. The Alliance Council chamber was packed with representatives from every major species when Secretary Chun arrived from Earth. She was older than her daughter, Commander Chun, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. And she carried a data crystal that would reshape galactic politics. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Secretary Chun said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came from leading a species through isolation and into galactic warfare. "I know many of you have questions about Earth's intentions, about the RKVs, about our methods. I'm here to provide answers, and I'm afraid you won't like them." She activated the data crystal. Holographic displays filled the chamber, showing trajectories, targeting data, and information that made Shylara's heart sink. "Package 2, Secretary Chan said simply. "You've all heard rumors, let me confirm them. Yes, we launched additional RKVs. No, they're not all targeted at the crash." The chamber erupted in chaos. Species representatives shouted accusations and demands. But Secretary Chun waited patiently for silence. The 17 RKVs targeting the crash were a deterrent against a specific enemy, she continued. "Package 2 is a deterrent against war itself. We have deployed 43 additional RKVs on variable trajectories. They can be retargeted mid-flight using quantum communications. And they are currently aimed at strategic targets across the galaxy, including Alliance worlds. You dare threaten us?" The Thorian general thundered. "I dare to be honest," Secretary Chen replied. "Earth spent 50 years watching your war, watching billions die in scheduled battles, watching the galaxy tear itself apart over honor and convention. We decided that if we were going to join galactic civilization, we would do so on our terms, which are what?" Shialara asked, her voice barely steady. "Simple. No more galaxy-spanning wars," Secretary Chen said. "No more centuries of conflict. Humanity has proven we can fight effectively. And now we're using that capability as leverage for peace, permanent peace." She pulled up targeting data. "These RKVs will remain in position, ready to launch, as insurance against any faction crash, alliance, or future threats that attempts to restart large-scale interstellar warfare. Think of it as," she paused, "mutually assured destruction. But on a galactic scale, you're holding the galaxy hostage," a Valshara elder said. "We're preventing another 300 years of war," Secretary Chung corrected. "Look at the data. How many died in your civilized conflict? How many worlds were damaged? How much potential was wasted on scheduled battles in neutral zones and conventions that accomplish nothing except prolonging the suffering? So you appoint yourselves as galactic police?" The general asked. "No," Secretary Chen said firmly. "We appoint ourselves as the ultimate consequence if species want to have small conflicts, border disputes, minor skirmishes. That's between them. But if anyone tries to launch another war on the scale of what we just witnessed, they'll face the same choice we gave the crash: stand down or face extinction." Marcus Webb stood and addressed the council. "I know how this sounds, believe me. We debated this for months on Earth, but here's the reality. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to enforce some human code of ethics. We just want to prevent mass death. And we're willing to be the villains in your history books if it means future generations don't experience what the last 300 years brought." Krathax rose from his seat, his forearms spread in a gesture that combined respect and challenge. "Commander Webb taught me that real honor is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Is this not what humanity is attempting? Protecting the galaxy from itself? By threatening everyone equally?" The Velshara elder asked. "By making war too costly to contemplate," Krathax replied. "My people value martial honor, but I have learned that there is no honor in endless cycles of violence. If humanity's methods seem harsh, perhaps it is because gentle methods failed." The debate continued for hours. Species divided into factions. Some wanted humanity expelled from the galaxy. Others saw the logic in deterrence. Still others proposed alternative security arrangements or found Commander Sarah. Chun in an observation lounge overlooking the planet. The younger Chun looked exhausted, still recovering from injuries sustained at Velshara Prime. Your mother made quite an impression, Shialara said. Yeah, she tends to do that, Sarah replied. You're wondering if this was the plan all along, was it? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Not exactly. The RKVs targeting the crash were always contingency plans. The package too? That developed during the war. As we saw how the galaxy operates, we realized that winning this war wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. Civilized species fighting civilized wars that accomplish nothing except prolonging suffering. So you decided to enforce peace at gunpoint. At missile point, Sarah corrected with a tired smile. And yes, I understand how hypocritical it sounds. Humans, who have fought more wars than any species in the galaxy, presuming to tell everyone else how to live peacefully, but maybe it takes someone familiar with violence to recognize when violence needs to stop. Over the following weeks, the galaxy reluctantly accepted what became known as the human deterrence. 43 RKVs in strategic positions, capable of ending any major power within days of hostilities. Beginning the Kresh Dominion fragmented into dozens of independent hive clusters. Some returned to their original territories and developed isolated peaceful societies. Others joined the alliance as full members, pledging to adopt individual decision-making structures. The Free Worlds Alliance were structured, no longer needing massive military coordination against an existential threat. Member species began focusing on exploration, trade, and cultural exchange. Human advisors spread throughout the galaxy, not to command, but to teach. Krathex established the first multi-species tactical academy, where humans trained alongside Zeekthi, Velshara, Thorian, and even reformed Kresh in methods of conflict resolution and, when necessary, effective warfare. Strange, isn't it? Marcus Webb said to Shialara during the Academy's opening ceremony. We came here to fight a war. And now we're teaching people how to fight better, but also how to avoid fighting. Your species is full of contradictions, Shialara observed. That's humanity in a nutshell, Webb agreed. We're capable of incredible violence and incredible compassion. Often simultaneously, the key is channeling both toward useful ends. Sarah Chun remained in command of Earth's military presence in the galaxy. But that presence was deliberately minimal. A dozen ships in strategic locations. More symbol than actual force during a ceremony honoring those who died at Velshara Prime. Chun gave a speech that became famous across the galaxy. We didn't come here for glory or conquest or to prove we were better than you. We came because you asked for help, and because helping is what humans do, yes. Our methods were harsh, and yes, we broke every rule you held sacred. But we also ended a war that had killed billions and would have killed billions more. She paused, looking out at an audience that included species from across the known galaxy. You've called us barbaric, uncivilized, brutal, all true, but you've also called us friends. Allies, saviors, also true. We're complicated. We're contradictory. And we're absolutely terrifying when we need to be. And that's the point. The galaxy now knows that if it returns to total war, humanity will respond with total consequences. We pray you're smart enough to never test that. The ceremony ended in silence. Some attendees were crying, others looked thoughtful, and a few seemed angry, but all of them understood the message. 50 years later, Shialara had become the Alliance's chief historian. She had documented everything. From first contact with humans to the long peace that followed. She stood in her archive on Velshara Prime, now fully rebuilt. Reviewing materials for a comprehensive history she was writing, data was clear. In the 50 years since humanity entered galactic politics, there had been minor conflicts, border disputes, trade disagreements, occasionally violence, but nothing approaching the scale of the Kresh War. The RKVs remained in position, silent guardians or sleeping threats, depending on one's perspective. Earth had never activated them beyond initial deployment, but their presence changed everything. Grandmother Shialara? A young Velshara historian approached. There's a situation developing at the Galactic Edge unknown vessels. Possibly hostile. The Council is debating whether to respond. Shialara felt her heart sink. She accessed the intelligence reports and saw that the situation was serious. A new species, technologically advanced, making aggressive moves toward Alliance space. Are they calling for military action? She asked. Some are, the young historian said. But others are suggesting, he paused, uncomfortable with the idea, that we contact Earth. Shialara made her way to the council chamber. The debate had been going on for hours, with no consensus. We can handle this ourselves, the Thorian representative argued. We have our own military forces, our own capabilities. We don't need human intervention. But do we need human deterrence? Ezek the counselor countered. If these newcomers see our military response and decide to escalate, wouldn't it be prudent to remind them that the galaxy has ultimate consequences? You want to threaten them with annihilation before we even attempt diplomacy? The Velshara elder protested.